Alrighty, so week 8. Today, in this real world, right, you're all working on week 7, as you've probably kind of seen. So in this case, I'm a week ahead of you. And in this week, no more code alongs. I mentioned this already. And we do 2 steps in our project, and we do Flexbox. So in this case, I should step back. We're actually doing page layout. So where you did some styling, you started styling, hopefully implementing all the requirements for that. Now we want to actually implement Flexbox, and I say and or grid. I ended up using some of both because when you think about this, you're changing your page layout to flex, and then within that you can use flex items, something we've learned about, or you could, and in my case I ended up using grid because I felt like I had a little more control. But in your case, I'm going to say and or. So it's kind of like when you went through those, if there was one you felt more comfortable with, but also you can use both in there. And then we do media queries. Right, so then we look at the idea that as our page changes, we want to make specific viewport layout changes based on how the user is viewing our site. The user's not going to do what we do, which is go in there and move it back and forth to see it changes. What we're really doing is when that user looks at my site at that particular resolution, then I want to make these changes that would be much more responsive to, and responsive in that case is probably not the best word, that is going to give that user the best experience is what I would say. Okay. So here, before I recorded this, I went through and I looked at the instruction and the video from last semester. And I'm going to leave the videos because I think they're fine. But one thing I wanted to say is when you're watching the video, I talk about this idea of the images folder, and you will see why I've implemented the images folder at the same level. Okay, so just know that when I talk about it at the beginning in here, and I talk about how when students that semester were copying it over for each P1, P2, P3, it was duplicating. So hopefully it gives you a little feeling about why I switched to the having it at the same level. But what is still true here, and that's why I ended up leaving it, is the idea of optimizing. Is that you definitely want to learn how to, again, I say, this is something we learned in 82, but you definitely want to do that. Learn how to have those images optimized, because users don't want to wait. Images hate big images. They like the visual aspect of it. They just don't want to wait for it. So as web developers, we're always trying to give them the best experience from the image perspective because we know how important they are, but we also try to minimize those sizes. So there are many different ways to optimize. There's websites that you can send your images to, and it'll give you back an optimized image. There's software that is available out there. So there's many paths to this. And I don't absolutely say you have to, but from first, what's the appropriate size, and then can I optimize it? So having some experience is good in that area. And then talking about making sure you're updating your README for your general description of that, how you're approaching that layout. And remember, just like before, I don't have specific commits, but remember what I'm looking for in your commits is your progress, your process, and way important, because you're not writing as much CSS in this case, but your documentation in your CSS file for how you're implementing Flex and or grid, right? And you can also be looking at some of the ways you can make images responsive. Now I looked ahead, and at the final stage I give you some more specifics, but having images responsive in this case would also be good, because in this case what we're doing is handling that flex nature or grid nature. So having that implemented here is also a good idea. Okay. But more importantly, just to understand when I talk about this in the video, right, it applies to last semester. We've already made these changes. So when we're looking at the structure, let me go back here real quick, right? This is, sorry, I know it's pretty big. It's actually just bringing mine over, right? So this is the way it needs to look, okay? Okay, so other than that, I think the video should stand on its own and you should be fine. So then as we're looking ahead to then the next item, which is, media queries, I give you a specific as far as what you need to write. Like you have to choose one of the standards that we got introduced to because there were several standards in there. And then I gave you a heads up about make sure, right, on your new, because you're going to end up creating a new page for this one. So make sure, right, you're not adding, don't add it to the menu, add it to somewhere in your content itself. Right? Make sure your outliner still looks good. Limit your divs, right? Right. So make sure your site map is, or if you called it map or site, is linked in the footer of all your pages, right? And again, your commits show your progress here. All right. So this is fun. I really also, and I talk about this in that video, but understanding how to use DevTools to see the different media queries is really helpful. And what I look for on this work is really in the media queries is what did you change? Can I see a visual change? What did you set those points and and what are the changes you made to make your page actually have a responsive to that viewport size? Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that both of the videos are from last semester. I reviewed them today. They were pertinent except for that discussion of the images, so I wanted to talk about that. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Dave was covered a lot at the beginning in the HTML is to give, maybe header and main and other things an ID. And the only time you need to use an ID on those semantic elements tags is when you are linking to them. So if your content doesn't have a page link, we often call those also a jump link that jumps down to a part in the page, then make sure you remove those because they're not needed. Again, they're only used when they're not used semantically, the IDs, it's really the tags themselves, it's the H1s or the H1, H2, H3, H4 that give the heading, the label to that level, but we don't need, the IDs don't provide a semantic purpose. So if you don't use them, meaning in your content, I'm repeating here, but in your content somewhere linking to those, then just remove them. And I will look for that this time because it's like this idea of optimizing. We're moving towards our final submission and we're just refining by doing the steps for this week and starting to optimize our sites because this is a very common practice when you're doing HTML. We're doing front-end design here. And when I say design, we're actually not doing the full stack of design. We're really saying, I know how to write HTML. I know how to write some CSS. I know how to use Flexbox and Grid. I know how to do media queries. There's a lot we haven't covered, but there's a lot you have. So, and I say this and all this, make sure you document your work. This is an important part of what I look for when I'm grading. I look at your commits. I, of course, look at your output to see if everything validates. Does your HTML5 outliner still do you have all the required parts? When I go look, did you implement Flex and or Grid in your page layout? I'll look for that. And I'll look at your documentation to help support that you documented the work that you did. All right, so I just wanted to cover those things. And then we're now at the place where we have one more item, right? So we have week 9. So I'm going to say this, if you finish this week and you want to work on week 9, send me a message. I probably could get that out this week. So it's kind of fun if you get to that place and you're like, hey, I'm ready to do the last step, then I'd be happy to get that ready. Otherwise, your reply, the required reply for this is, let's see. Oh yeah, I wondered about this one. Like, do you understand what I'm talking about when I mention that if you're not using these IDs in the, if you're not using the IDs, so let me clarify because I just thought about this. You could be using those IDs also for CSS. So I shouldn't say only, but if you're not using the IDs in the semantic elements, right, for either CSS, right, or a page link, I'm glad I thought about that, then remove them. Do you understand what I mean by that, or do you have a question? All right, have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.